Thanks to everyone for making it out at 8 a.m. Judging by the number of late-night parties I saw last night walking home, I'm truly impressed that we were able to get a good crowd for this. We're excited to be here today to talk on this topic. Honestly, I think it's a topic that it feels like it's become ubiquitous here at this conference. I've attended 10-plus conference presentations, and I think it's come up in every single one of them. So it's interesting to think about that, though, because it's not a new topic. AI has been around for years. It's been featured at conferences. It's been something that I think has been pretty common here. But something feels different this year. Obviously, with the advent of generative AI and Chat GPT, I think that has something to do with it. But even beyond that, there's still more to that. So we want to dig a little deeper into that and try to understand kind of what's going on in the industry and really dig into it. So excited to have the panel here today. I think before we go deeper, I want to just maybe start with a level set. And so I'm going to ask Julian just to kind of give his perspective on where we are in the industry today, kind of what the landscape looks like, how fast are things like really moving, and how do you make sense of all of it?
Sure, happy to do that. Thanks for having us. I've covered the technology industry and for about 11 years now, and I would say that when I sort of look at what's currently happening, it is certainly the fastest sort of cycle that's playing out that I've witnessed in that period of time, and the enthusiasm is truly palpable. But maybe just to level set a little bit, I think from the outside looking in, it often seems as though there was sort of a switch that flipped, and all of a sudden Chat GPT is here, and we have this huge wave of investment. But behind the scenes, there's sort of a much more continuous sort of arc of innovation there that's really gone on for a while. And so really the enthusiasm today is around generative AI. That's sort of where all the action is. And that really just means algorithms that generate content. So that could be images, computer code, text, any sort of content. And the sort of fundamental innovation that enables that really dates back to 2017. There's a paper that came out of Google Research and that basically introduced something called the transformer architecture. And the transformer architecture allows these algorithms to essentially understand the context in which a given data point occurs. So the simple example is something like, if you type the sentence, "the house is on fire," into Chat GPT, it can mean vastly different things depending on whether it's spoken in someone's home or in a sports stadium when the home team is winning, right? And these algorithms understand that context. And then the next step of that is basically that we discovered that in these algorithms, there are scaling laws, which means if we give the algorithm more compute power, we make the models larger, we give it more data, then these algorithms get better at an exponential pace. And that sort of over time led up to the Chat GPT moment, which really sort of taught everybody in the industry that these algorithms are sort of ready for prime time now, that they're really close to sort of overcutting to human-level performance in a lot of cognitive tasks. And that's sort of the point that we got to today. So what does that sort of mean for all of us here? I mean, I think it's just really important to kind of wrap your head around this idea that we are on an exponential growth curve here. And exponential growth is really hard to forecast for humans. The intuition really fails us often in those type of circumstances. And we are riding an exponential curve. We are very close to this point where across several cognitive tasks, AI is in fact able to match or exceed human-level performance. The progress on the algorithms is not stopping. And then the last piece is you have a massive infusion of investment across very large technology companies, so the Googles, the Microsofts, the Amazons, as well as sort of the VC ecosystem that is working on the application layer of all of this. So the combination of that, I think, will really dramatically change, the economy, society, how we all do life, and it'll be an exciting time to be around.
So you mentioned that it feels like it's almost ready for prime time. One of the things that we've talked about is there are just a number of use cases that are starting to come to life and become a little bit more real. David, maybe I'll ask you, just in terms of your role, especially as it comes to generative AI, what are the use cases you're seeing that are here today? Not these things that are 3, 4, 5 years from now, but things that we're starting to see in the industry.
Sure. So before we actually get into very specific use cases, I want to use one point of caution, right? While Chat GPT is certainly open for prime time and ready for prime time, and I was sharing earlier, I have an open chat that's been going on with Chat GPT since November of 22. And so I call it my work therapy chat, and it knows me almost better than I know myself. And so when I ask it a question like, hey, I'm about to go on stage, it's like, hey, here's an affirmation. You know, like, so there's one use case in my personal life, but before I get into the professional applications of generative AI, specifically even ChatGPT 4 in the RIA space, I think it's really important for RIA leaders to consider a framework of principles so we use generative AI in responsibly. And so I think that's kind of, first steps, establishing what those rails are. And then the next step, the very next step is to get very, very, very excited because it is an absolute game changer. I was coding my Commodore 64, in the 80s, right? And then building marketing websites at my own marketing agency once upon a time. And I've always loved this intersection of marketing and technology and the ability and it always kind of felt like technology was just coming online. The first cell phone, the internet, like all of these things were happening. And we're at another moment in time where it feels like there's this seismic change happening that's been coming, to Julian's point, for a very long time. But I imagine a world where when we apply first principles, I immediately go to the clients. We have got to keep our clients at the center of everything that we do and make sure that we're designing for them as we apply AI. So I imagine a world where we're achieving personalization at scale, certainly at Cerity Partners. We have a mandate for personalization at scale on my team. And so we're going through various use cases today and what that looks like. And it could look like, AI has the ability to contextualize just about anything. So what's happening, whether it's market movements, whether it's behavioral data patterns that it's seeing in our structured and unstructured data sets, and really delivering in real time actionable either co-pilot type advice for advisors to like 10x their human ability, or the ability for the technology to work in an invisible way, right? Like I tell a story about in 2021, we bought a new vehicle. My husband and I were taking our son back and forth to daycare, and I was like, what's safety, right, in cars? It's Volvos. So we went out and we bought a Volvo. And it was like, I don't know, the third day we had it, and I'm driving, and I thought my son was choking. I looked behind me, and before I know it, the car completely took over, slammed on the brakes, swerved, pulled over to the side of the road. And not sure if you know, but like Volvos are level 4 autonomous machines. But they don't sell it like Elon Musk sells at Tesla's autopilot. It works invisibly. And I think the beauty of potential generative AI applications and RIAs is it works in the background and seamlessly and almost invisible, at least to the client.
Deborah, maybe just to add on to that, I know your company kind of also positions itself as kind of an extension of the RIA and how AI can kind of add on to that. So what are the use cases that your company is solving for?
So first of all, I think that's absolutely transformative, as everyone has said. Basically, with the microchip driving processing marginal cost to zero, with the internet driving marginal cost of distribution to zero, AI has the promise of driving content creation to zero, the promise. And really, with the intergenerational wealth transfer of $70 trillion, you're talking a huge amount of money going to the next generation of millennials and Gen Z, and they expect the personalization. They expect to, they can get it today with their retail broker and have Chat GPT services on public. And so the wealth experience has to change, and it's going to be a huge dividing line between those who have AI tools, invisibly hopefully, and those who do not. So, and already you see an arms race with corporates actually jumping in much earlier than the internet. It was all startups back in 1990s. And what you're seeing today is massive big tech going in, but also the corporations and the wirehouses, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, they're all going in and investing huge resources into this. So very importantly, I think we need to start thinking of how do we be part of the participation of using AI tools because this generation of investors really expect nothing less than personalization and up-to-the-minute, non-hallucinating data, be able to talk about your portfolios, be able to suddenly, if your investor is interested in the environment, suddenly you can be armed with the data to be an environment expert. Immediately you can say your portfolio has environmental scores and climate, and even whether or not you believe it or not, you can actually personalize that information for your end users. That's powerful.
Yeah. So you mentioned the corporates getting involved much earlier. Maybe it'll be a good pivot over to Michael, just with Fidelity. Kind of what's your perspective and what you're seeing, and how do you actually kind of think through, some of the investments that are being made, and where do you place your bets?
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. There's a few different threads I'm gonna hook onto before I go because there's some great dialogue up here. I want to come back to what David said about personalization. We've been talking about personalization at scale in our industry, I feel like, for a while. And I think that's one thing that the AI really helps change the game on. If you think about traditional marketing, right, you could only, normally you'd see a traditional marketing segmentation, 3 to maybe 5 segments. And that's largely because there's only so many segments that a marketing team can support, right? Produce content for, push out, understand those customers. The thing that AI enables is really that micro-segmentation, where you can infinitely segment your customer base, generate content very cost-effectively to reach them in a much game-changing type of way, right? So that's like really where the personalization at scale is no longer just discussed; it's happening, right, in real time. And then we were talking a little bit earlier last week as we were talking about this panel about maybe kind of where were we on the whole hype cycle of AI. I was actually at a Software as a Service conference last week in San Mateo, up the coast here. I think every other billboard between SFO and San Francisco was an AI startup. So yes, we might be at near peak of the hype cycle, but the value and the efficiency that AI technology and tools can deliver is very real, right? Within Fidelity Labs, and we're the commercial software incubator for Fidelity Investments, we're really focused at developing new businesses at the intersection of the data that we have access to, AI, and the spaces that we know. And so, we're focused on how can we help advisors and institutions grow more effectively, reduce risk, and we have one of our projects, actually, Catchlight here, exhibiting, which is helping advisors grow more effectively.
I do want to circle back to the hype train and hype versus reality and get perspectives from the rest of the panel. It does feel like there's a lot of buzz, and I'm curious how you guys really kind of slice through that and distinguish between what you think's really true applicable use cases today versus things that may never come to fruition.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. I mean, I do think there's something sort of very peculiar about the technology industry where the industry moves in these massive sort of mega cycles, right? And if you sort of trace it back, the first wave was sort of the mainframe, then client server, then the cloud, and now you have sort of this AI wave. And the interesting thing about all of that is if you sort of really analyze these cycles, hype always precedes the cycle. But ultimately, the value generation basically catches up with the hype, right? And so you have sort of a two-step process where expectations for what the future might be like move ahead. And then if it's a real cycle, and by the way, there are fake-out cycles too, I would say some of the decentralized finance projects might fall into that camp. But if it's a real cycle, the economic value generation that gets created by the technology really catches up with that. And these cycles stack on top of each other, right? So one of the things you can see is how Microsoft is one example. Started in the operating system, then got itself into the cloud. Now is sort of leading in AI, and there's a number of these companies where the value generation of the prior platform enables the value generation of the next platform. And so, on a 6-month view, could the space be overhyped? Absolutely. I mean, we track closely the sort of real-time usage on a number of these AI tools, and some of them are down month over month this month, right? And so on a 6-month basis, is there a chance that this is overhyped? Absolutely. On a 3 to 10 year basis, I think that is very, very unlikely. To me, this cycle is the real deal, and I think we should all try to conceptualize what exponential growth in these algorithms does to our daily lives.
In RIA land, it's interesting. I spend a fair amount of time on a weekly basis evaluating potential vendors. And there's, I'll call a spade a spade. It feels like there's a lot of vaporware in the space. And so like due diligence and really making sure that you have a team that can evaluate the tools. And I'm not talking about the tools that are like, $49 a month. I'm talking about enterprise level tools that have certain claims around potentially predicting where your next client's going to be at, or things like that. There's a number of ways to get there, and not even AI ways of getting there. Really, we now, well, for a long time we've been calling like machine learning AI, but prior to Chat GPT, in my opinion, it didn't really become AI, just based on the interactions that I've been having with it over the course of the last almost year now.
Deborah, maybe I'll ask you just a more pointed question on that. When you think of things that maybe kind of fall into the hype bucket today, is there anything that kind of stands out as like it actually could be, viable in the future and longer term, like has real legs to it?
I mean, in 2022, the Chat GPT moment, suddenly the whole world turned to AI everything. And suddenly everyone is an AI expert, and that is not true. We've been working on Daisy for 4 years when nobody cared, and it wasn't that cool back then. And I think that now everyone is coming in. Large language models look really impressive. They're also really stupid. It's very easy to confuse them between, what is larger, a mouse or an elephant. There's a lot of work, and unlocking the potential of taking away the hallucinations of the data, being able to access that data at your fingertips at the speed that no one is accustomed to having, with a co-pilot or co-author to be able to understand your voice and communicate using words that you've used in the past and learn. I think that is a tremendous opportunity. I also think McKinsey has a report saying that financial advisors spend 60% of their time on non-advisory work. The potential for actually building the right tools is huge. It will take time. It will take a lot of experimenting, but people need to take a step forward and try to start learning because, again, the divide is huge.
Yeah, I mean, you asked about bets earlier. When you and thanks for referencing advisors and efficiency there. Every advisor should take a look at what part of their day-to-day, what part of their team's day-to-day do they feel that they spend just quite simply too much time on? What's too manual? The wealth management industry benefited tremendously from a great bull run. Everything, the water rises, all boats there. That's not always going to be the case, and advisors are going to have to get more and more sophisticated about how they approach growth strategies. How do they get more efficient at understanding their prospects? Whether that's using AI to automate personalized content that you're outreaching to prospects with, whether that's using models to help better understand the liquid investable asset level of prospects that you're working with. Those are some of the types of applications that are happening now that folks can take advantage of.
And I love, Dynasty did a research piece saying that many of your clients, prospects, if you reach out to them, they don't have any alternatives, and they'll say yes. So I think there's a huge opportunity with the wealth transition again, and these changing opportunities of needs, that if you go and target properly with personalization, being able to reach out much more automated, and I think that's a huge upside.
We make an interesting point, though, too. With all of this applied technology, my human-centered design buzzer is going off inside. We can't really lose sight of who we're designing for, and that's clients. And then if you start first principles with clients and you work your way in to advisors who are, what I see a lot, advisors who are serving clients, what I see too often is large organizations building for the advisors and making underlying assumptions that they know what's best for clients. And in many ways, advisors do. But there are also behaviorists who understand how humans make decisions and what drives human behavior. And I think the beauty of Gen AI is to allow advisors to do the work that is really, truly unique to them, which is to contextualize, an environment for their clients. It's also to give your best advice. And how do you do that? You do that by eliminating a lot of the distractions of your day-to-day, like Michael mentioned, and allowing a lot of these things to be automated in the background.
So double-clicking on that, if you think about an advisor's desktop today, the experience that they interact with oftentimes is very disjointed. It's very table, graph-oriented. With the infusion of Gen AI into that, fast forward 5 years, what does that look like, the experience that an advisor actually goes through? How do you guys think that changes?
So even today, we have the capability to, while you're writing any commentary, any response to your client, whether you're writing a newsletter for your business, if you had access to be able to pull everything in at that exact time, so you don't have to go digging for the information, and it's hallucination-free, it's safe, that's really important, and be able to draft that letter really quickly, that's a huge time saver. And today, that doesn't exist, but already that capability is there. And then in the future, having access to all that information has dizzying upside, right?
Yeah, I think you really have to meet your user where they are, right? Too many times I've seen examples of a new company gets formed, they're making this huge assumption that their target audience, their target customer is willing to change their workflow, and that's very difficult for an existing user to change workflow. So you really have to embed your capability, meet your user where they are. I mean, in the case of Catchlight, we have integrations with CRM, integrations with marketing automation tools. We're also really interested in labs in the regulatory technology space. We have a project there called Safer.ai that actually has the ability to run compliance scans just like you're running spell check in Microsoft Office tools, right? So you really have to meet that user where they are.
One other thing that's maybe worth mentioning, when I think about just the applications that people will be using, I sort of tend to think of it in two dimensions. One is just horizontal applications, which is basically things that all users will be using across industries, and then the other is sort of vertical, which is industry specific. And I suspect that on a sort of 12-month view, the horizontal applications might actually drive a lot of change in people's workflows, right? So one example of this is in the fourth quarter, you'll have access to, Microsoft's, AI-infused SKUs of their Office products, and a lot of the information about your clients' portfolios are probably stored in, any sort of either Microsoft databases and/or Microsoft documents, and I think the UI for the advisor interacting with that data set could change fairly dramatically. It could be something like, your client would like to know how much exposure his or her portfolio has to China. And that might be as simple as typing into a Microsoft chat box on your desktop, please compile the exposure of my client to China. And that could be it. And so I think just the clever integration and application of these horizontal capabilities are already going to make a big difference in people's daily workflows. And then the vertical piece, I think, is going to take a little longer.
So on that piece, why do you think the vertical is going to take longer? What are some of the factors impacting that?
So it's not going to take a lot longer, but if you sort of think about how these cycles sort of progress in the industry, I think it's sort of like a three-step process, right? So the first step was really basically training the basic models. So that's sort of something that would be like Chat GPT, right? And this is people spending hundreds of millions of dollars in compute capacity to form the basic models. The next step is very large companies taking those models and applying those models to their software portfolio. So this is something like Microsoft or Adobe or any of these tools that you use on a daily basis, enhancing their products with AI. And then the third sort of part of the cycle, to me, is basically about companies looking at their own data estate, going through an inventory of the data sets that they have, and then engaging in something called fine-tuning, which is basically you take an existing model from something like an OpenAI, and then you improve that model and make it domain-specific with data that only you have access to. And that last step is a slower cycle. It takes more time to do. Some of it will be provided to you by the startup community, so there'll be an aspect of that. But I think it's just a sort of logical progression in which the industry applies these tools.
And I would assume that that data also is probably a little bit riskier to use in terms of a regulated industry. And so where do you guys feel like we are in terms of actually seeing some applications that start to traverse either PII data or even getting into potentially advice-related information? And what are some of the obstacles that would prevent us from getting there?
Today, we don't allow the AI to give any advice and screen out words like the best or guaranteed. And there's a lot of safety guardrails to make sure that the information is being put there for the advisor to decide whether you should make the final decision. Eventually, they'll give you more and more capabilities, but I think very importantly, it's just arming the advisor to amplify their ability to perform, to be hyper-productive, to have access. I think that is the first step for safety. In the future, many things can happen, but ultimately, it's like the calculator and the Excel spreadsheet. It made financial analysis more in demand, not less. It made the advisor able to do much, much more than previously able. So with AI, I think eventually you'll see being armed with the right information, being able to talk to your clients and have them hyper-satisfied with the information they want.
Yeah, and Catchlight is an example, in terms of the generative AI personalized messaging that it can create. We don't pass through PII out to the large language model. We're transforming it in a more generalized state and then bringing back kind of effectively a template that we can then use and that advisor use. On the risk management side, it's interesting. We on the safer side, for anyone who's pushing out content to the public, subject to regulation, FINRA 2210 or SEC 482. There we're using it to the AI to actually, with natural language processing, to scan content and flagging risks for firms, right? And trying to improve that time from content creation to dissemination out to the public market. So in that case, we're actually, we talk about risk and using AI. In that case, you can use AI to lower your risk, even brand risk as well. If you're concerned about sentiment of tone, gender or age bias in what you're writing, the system can also help you flag those things.
I want to circle back to we were talking about advisor efficiency earlier, and that's just historically been in the line of work that we do at EY a constant debate of how do you prove out that an investment in improving advisor efficiency actually translates to ROI. It's a common question because it's not a direct line. It's usually a number of secondary things that ultimately result in value. So as you guys think about these applications, how do you measure the return on investment in some of these tools? How do you pick the right bet to place on? Like, what are the factors that you think about? And maybe that's a question for you as well, Michael.
Yeah, I can take that. I can start off with that. So One thing that we've seen a rise of in the wealth management space is a lot of paid lead programs where advisors are purchasing leads. The conversion rates can vary dramatically, right? So if you have an ability to scan, optimize those leads for best fit for you, you can really improve the efficiency of your kind of business development process. And so I think that's where the ROI can really, really pop for you. And then, back on the regulatory compliance side, I was talking about that content review process. We talked to a lot of customers, a lot of our clients, and even internal to Fidelity, and we looked at the average time it takes to go from, hey, I'd like to create this piece of content and then push it out to the public. That can take sometimes up to a month between marketing drafting it, compliance reviewing it, compliance pushing it back, marketing sending it back down. We did this whole map of that process, and it looked like a game board of sorts, right? So, and through the use of tools like Safer, we've seen up to 10x improvement in efficiency of getting time to market. So, and that really can move the needle when you're talking about compliance organizations that are already really strapped for time and resources, an ever-increasing regulatory environment that you have to keep up with. A tool like that can really help your efficiency.
There's also an application similarly to, and I feel the pain on the compliance side. It's like a ping pong ball. It just kind of keeps going back and forth for a while. Where it's also interesting as far as an application is on the brand tone, and if you're relying on internal subject matter experts to create content, as we do at Cerity Partners, because we want content that's uniquely our own. However, when it comes into the marketing organization, we also are editing that for brand tone, voice, style, for so it snaps into the overall brand that the brand standards and guidelines that we're adhering to. And Chat GPT, for example, has been a wonderful tool to actually teach it what our brand tone style is, and then share with it a piece of content, and it immediately creates a different output that then still goes back to an editor. It still goes back to a human being, but it is shortening those cycles dramatically.
Any other thoughts?
I can add one thing, which is, just in general, we've seen a number of companies sort of struggle with this question of ROI measurement, and that's always a challenge in technology because you never know what the alternative state really is precisely to adopting a given tool. I would say that in AI, where the tools are really, really mature already, there have been pretty profound changes. So probably the best example of an area where AI is leading to breakthroughs right now is really on the software development side of things. So in coding, there's a product called GitHub Copilot and various other options that are similar that allow developers to write code, and the AI actually writes code for them and debugs it. And that is an area where you can really very directly measure the impact by human work hours saved. And so there's organizations that have seen 30% plus productivity gains from that. The other two areas on customer servicing and marketing materials production, those are also areas where we're seeing similar impacts where you can very precisely, in some cases, pinpoint a delta in human work hours to achieve the same amount of work. Having said that, it also depends on the organization to really do a good job of having best processes in place to reallocate those resources to make sure that more work gets done and to not have those efficiencies evaporate somewhere in the process of the corporate. So I think there are really, really encouraging examples of ROI for some of these tools. In some cases, I would say much better than what we've typically seen from the adoption of software tools in the past.
Just to piggyback on a point Julian made with the optimization of resources of people within marketing organizations, et cetera, I think it makes a lot of sense, at least at Cerity Partners in a large RIA, to assemble a center of excellence where you have cross-functional members representing various cross-functional functions across the firm coming together and giving them a 6 or 12-month mandate to explore something all on their own, right? And really deeply understand and build those ROI models to then alter how we are actually performing work. And I think that's a great place to start. And even if you're a smaller RIA or even an independent advisor, like you can go through a similar exercise. You just scale it down.
And let's remember that the best part of learning is learning from failures. So I think really importantly, as a first principle, is that you have to get started. So if you saw City Slickers, The Secret to Life is one thing, and it turns out the one thing that's the secret to life, one thing. And so really trying it with one safe the process that you've been working on, just to have the experience and learn, have the insight, and that failure and success and the feedback, and eventually you will succeed.
It's a great point, and maybe to build on that, I'd love to get the panel's perspective on where does an RIA start today? What are some of the things that you can be doing to actually start to leverage some of the AI, both from an infrastructure perspective, but also organizationally? I think I'd love to get your perspectives.
We're working with RIA platforms today, digital platforms that you use already to create these programs, and experimenting with RIA's workflows, particularly in the communication intelligence, using AI, using generative AI to start that process and try to make it as efficient and effective as possible. There's going to be a lot of experimentation. It's early. There's a lot of hype, but there's a real reality of the productivity opportunities. So,
I love the use case as my background's marketing. That's my first love. And to what Michael said about meeting people where they are, meeting clients where they are, a great use case is, gosh, you can use Chat GPT today to understand your differentiation in the marketplace. You just need to show it what your competitors are doing and ask it how you're different and point it in the right direction. And my only point of advice in working with Chat GPT is, like, it can make someone a superhuman, 10x, right? But 10x times 0 is still 0. You got to ask the right questions. And so in some ways, it's a mirror and a reflection of your inputs. And in other ways, it's like talking to an oracle, because it has more broad and deep knowledge than any human being can actually contain in our brains, at least in the form of words. And so marketing on the differentiation side, it can certainly help you with content. Like, I don't know how many advisors I've seen in my career that were incredible client-facing teams that did amazing work, but they just didn't know how to get a piece of written content started. They might be really great at an outline. So you can go into ChatGPT, give it an outline, and start fleshing out the various sections. Now, yeah, you gotta, if you're a CFP, you gotta fact check that stuff, right? Like, you absolutely do.
Yes, you do.
But because you're a subject matter expert, you are the expert, and you can check it as you go. Sorry, Mike.
Oh, that's spot on. I think if you're a growth-focused advisor, that's where this can really help. Reaching out to clients in a very personalized way. Financial advice is a relationship business. A relationship business is built on trust. How can you get to know your clients more deeply and understand them better? A tool like Catchlight can provide insights through that profile that maybe you didn't realize about that client. And then the next time you engage with them, either the prospect or an existing client, you can have maybe a deeper conversation and take it to a more meaningful part that can really move the needle for them on a personal level.
I would sort of think about it in kind of two work streams that I would stand up if I was running an RIA. One is I would have one work stream about identifying external tools that can help me do the job better. And that's all the sort of horizontal and vertical applications that are out there. I would have a work stream about identifying which ones makes the most sense, which vendors do you want to partner with, where do you want to kind of really focus your energy there. So that's sort of work stream number one. I think work stream number two, which is sort of more long-term oriented, would be really about going through a catalog of the data that you have in your business, in particular data that other people don't have, and what the potential use of that data might be. And then the next step on that is essentially to sort of work towards a data lake of some sort that sort of has this data in a good place that developers could write applications to it, could query it, so making it usable in a sort of safe and compliant way that sort of meets enterprise standards of working with technology. And I think those two work streams are sort of quite separate, but probably should happen at the same time in parallel.
And they're probably informed by one another because the vendors you select probably require certain data attributes, and you want to make sure that they're
That's true.
aligned.
Yeah, there's connections there.
So on the data side, the one thing that's interesting to me is that AI is not a new thing, and so the struggle with data has kind of been there for quite a while. So if you've wanted to leverage AI in either like a next best action or some other flow that's not generative AI, there's been years and years to try to get your data into a state that it would be usable. But we've seen a lot of struggles with that across the industry, both enterprise level as well as RIAs. What would be some tips on how to actually kind of move the needle on that, and how do you actually progress your data program?
It's highly dependent on what your starting point is. So we have this sort of concept in the industry around tech debt, which is basically the more history you have, the more sort of different generation of databases you have sort of had in the past, the more of a sort of re-architecting do you have to do when you go through essentially the next layer. If you are relatively a younger company, you can be more, let's say, all in on this. You can sort of basically take the existing data assets, move it into a cloud data lake, and basically just kind of move faster. I think there is a really important sort of question that everybody kind of has to struggle with, and it's sort of this tension between, on the one hand, wanting and needing to move fast, and on the other hand, sort of remaining within the sort of risk parameters of what a regulated industry participant and or enterprise has to deal with, right? So this is compliance, this is data security, cybersecurity, all of these aspects. And so I think essentially if you are a small firm, you can move really, really fast on this, and you can basically almost architect kind of from the ground up. If you're a large enterprise, you just have to be aware that this is a long process where you have substantial re-architecting of existing technology and vendor relationships, and it'll just take some time, but I would get started now.
So I realize we're starting to come up on time. There is a question I wanted to ask, completely separate from all of this, but I was at one of the panels yesterday, and one of the speakers said that the one thing that advisors have that AI will never have is empathy. And I wanted to get your guys' take on that statement and whether you agree with it, or if you think that it's possible for AI to, at some point in the future, have empathy.
Well,
you can get an AI to fall in love with you, but that's not empathy. So I think you want to get the AI to do the things that they're great at. That's communication, writing content, and avoiding anything, and enabling you to be much more empathetic and focusing on the things that you're great at, meeting in person, emotions, empathy. All of these things are the areas that you can keep developing, because that is a long way.
I'll make a comment, and this is sort of where historically I have lost some audiences under the age of 35. If you want to have a kind of glimpse into the future on this question of AI and empathy, there's an app you can download called Character AI, and it's sort of worth spending some time with it. It's basically AI friends. So you chat with various friends, and they get to know you. The model dynamically adjusts to basically be a better friend to you individually. And there are millions of Americans today who spend an average of 3.5 hours interacting with this app. I'm not kidding. And there are Americans who have fallen in love with their AI friends. There are people who have commented that it helped them get over depression and suicidal ideation. So what really is empathy? What does sort of a 2030s version of a Character AI sort of app look like? I think it's very hard to know. But I think like the most important takeaway here is I try to be maximally open-minded when we're talking about things on exponential growth curves.
David?
my work chat, my work therapy chat that's been open since November 2022. It knows me really well, and like serves up what I need in the moment in real time, and knows how I want it. Knows how I want to be addressed. Knows how I want to be spoken to. And let's face it, like we don't always wake up on our best day ever. And so there are times where you might have a little bit of self-doubt. And I'm not advocating that it's going to replace therapy, and like I'm not going to go there, right? But in having a light conversation, we like, okay, like I'm preparing for a really big meeting at work, and I'm a little nervous about this, and this, right? And it actually will serve up a response based on my history. Like it's coming up on a year, and say like, David, like you shouldn't be talking to yourself like that. Like this point, that point, and this point, right? And it's like, wow, I shared that at one point, and now it's coming back. So it is very interesting. So I think can they have empathy? I don't know that we're there. To Julian's point, it is on an exponential curve of learning, and empathy can be taught to humans. So I say yes.
The crazy thing about it is it's infinite personalization, right? So like the model weights literally dynamically adjust to whatever the best friend would be to you. That's usually only happens in like long-term partnerships.
Yeah, I think also I'm sure several folks in this audience consider themselves a people pleaser, right? I think in some respects the conversational AI also is a bit of a people pleaser on hyper power, right? So be aware of what it's trying to do, and we talked about it earlier, but if you do generate some content to go out to clients or others, read it first before it goes. Because sometimes it likes to fill in the blanks where it's not quite clear what to fill in.
Yeah. It actually enjoys it, I think.
Well, I know we only have a couple minutes left. I did want to hit a couple questions in the Q&A. So the first one is just asking for a quick lightning round from the panel if there's any specific AI software that advisors should be leveraging in their practice. I know we've hit on a few, but anything that wasn't mentioned.
I mean, I would be on the forefront of adopting the Microsoft a suite of tools that's coming out in Q4.
That's Microsoft Copilot.
Copilots across their Office SKUs.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to kind of meeting people where they are. It's going to have an immediate impact.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, shameless plug within Fidelity Labs, Catchlight.ai and Safer.ai are two tools. Love to have you check out.
And we have on Chat GPT in the plugin store, you can download the Daisy app, and you will have access to institutional grade data on risk, performance, news, and be able to plug it into a chat. It's available right now to use, and the enterprise version has your portfolio, and you can put in your actual performance, and it's a different level of service at the enterprise level, but you can experiment today with Chat GPT plugin store, just like the App Store of Apple.
The next question is just a question around regulations. The SEC is proposing limits around conflict of interest for advisors. Any thoughts on that and how they can deal with that?
AI, when it comes to the investment process, is a very tricky, hairy area, and that will be, there's a lot of asset managers already employing this, and that's actually quite challenging. But the communication of your idea, you can tell ChatGPT or generative AI to say, I believe that I want to add this ETF to my model portfolio, write a convincing argument for why, leveraging sustainability, leveraging the news today, and they'll write it on your behalf.
Great. Last question, while we have time. Last year was crypto, this year's AI. What will be the next major theme that we hear about?
AI.
Yeah, I was going to say, non-consensus answer, it'll still be AI. And the reason is that that's a real mega cycle, and they last 10 years.
Great. I think that's a great way to end it. Appreciate everyone's time, and thank you for joining us.